You know, there are a lot of smart people out there who will argue that we are not in control, that every biological outcome has been pre-programmed through your genes and early development, and that you are just a vessel carrying out that mission. Some have even written books about it, but I choose to take the other side of that bet. The side that weighs our ability to modulate our genetic expression and biological activity through lifestyle just a little bit more than that predetermined notion. And it's when I come across studies like the ones we're going to review today, highlighting how the way we eat can overpower genetic predispositions to disease, particularly some of the most scary ones, that this side I'm on feels like the right side. But ultimately, at the end of the day, all that matters is what you end up believing and doing. So take a listen and let me know what you think. Let's go. Yo. What is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftinbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic way. All right, you're still here. Awesome. Because we're going to double click on one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to biology. The idea that genes equal destiny. And we're going to use one of the scariest diseases on the planet, neurodegeneration, aka the literal loss of one's mind, to prove the point. In particular, that a gene cannot harm you if it's not expressed. And yeah, if you're picturing a little on-off switch sitting atop your 20,000 or so coding genes, you'd be using your internal AI engine to picture right. Well, I guess that's not AI, but you get the point. This is a real phenomenon known as epigenetics, which translates to on top of genes, or in my eyes, one of the most empowering realities in all of biology. And let's return to our neurodegeneration example to explain why. First, by traveling back a few decades to when a gene variant called APOE4 was discovered. And with it, the discovery that having one copy of this variant increased people's Alzheimer's risk, or one of the most prevalent forms of neurodegeneration, by 3 to 4-fold. Not cool. I know, but that's a little league stat compared to this next one. Because if you were an unlucky soul who had 2 copies of this gene variant, that risk rose to 8 to 12-fold, which is straight terrifying. But what if those genes were magically or intentionally unexpressed, essentially shut down from coding their proteins? Would the risk then be reduced? And if so, is there even any way to do that in a living, breathing, scrolling human? Well, here's where these 2 studies come into play, both looking at how one of the most controllable variables in our lives, diet, may be a deciding factor. Let's check them out. First, a joint study led by investigators from Mass General Brigham, Harvard, and MIT, solid crew, I know, followed over 4,000 women and 1,000 men from 2 cohorts, assessing genetic, cognitive, diet, and metabolic data for over 30 years. And of course, correlating it to Alzheimer's occurrences. And I'm not gonna lie, what they discovered was pretty damn empowering. Primarily that the foods people ate swayed their odds for disease. Shocker. I know. In particular, that eating a Mediterranean-like diet filled with wild fish, healthy fats, quality meats, fruits, veggies, and whole grains was correlated with some pretty cool results for those unlucky people with the APOE4 gene variant. With the people who benefited most from this way of eating being those ultra-high-risk individuals with 2 copies of the gene, the ones who were supposedly doomed by their genetics, indicating that this way of eating was modulating their biology and potentially changing how their genes were being expressed, creating what researchers coined a targeted prevention strategy for this thought to be predetermined fate. Now, here's where this gets really fascinating. the researchers didn't just look at the outcomes. They performed a deep dive into the metabolic mechanisms themselves, measuring over 400 different metabolites in the blood, which essentially act as molecular fingerprints for metabolism. And what they found only reinforced their observations. The people with the APOE4 variant had a totally different metabolic response to Mediterranean eating. For example, cholesterol esters and sphingomyelins, which are lipids associated with increased risk of dementia and strongly associated with the pathology of APOE4 carriers, were reduced when those individuals were eating a Mediterranean-like diet, while protective metabolites were upregulated, finding that nearly 40% of the Mediterranean diet's brain protective effect was mediated by these metabolic changes, but only in people with the APOE4 gene. Translation being, the worse the genetic situation, the more lifestyle helped. I mean, empowering much or what? And in case you thought that was it, you, my friend, will be glad to hear we're just getting started. Because now we move to a UK biobank study which followed over 60,000 people for 9 years, basically confirming everything we just talked about, observing that following a Mediterranean diet produced a 23% lower risk of developing dementia, regardless of genetic risk. And the really cool thing about this study was the fact that researchers calculated something called polygenic risk score, which combined all the known genetic variants for Alzheimer's, which ended up being dozens, including APOE4, and classified people based off their risk, finding that even people in the top 25 percentile of genetic risk still saw a significant dementia risk reduction from a Mediterranean-like diet. Pretty cool. And again, reiterating that you are very much in the driver's seat, and the lifestyle road you choose truly matters. And if you were wondering what exactly is so special about diet that can sway one's genetic expression, let me enlighten you. And since it's been the star of the Epigenetic show thus far, let's stick with that Mediterranean diet as an example. First, eating this real food, nutrient-packed way happens to be an inflammation-fighting powerhouse, which in turn combats one of neurodegeneration's key fuels, chronic inflammation. And in people with the APOE4 variant, who are especially prone to brain inflammation, this can be huge. Which also makes the standard Western ultra-processed way of eating the equivalent to adding gasoline to a neurodegenerative fire. But as a yin to that yang, a real whole food way of living targets and shuts down inflammatory pathways with powerhouse compounds like omega-3s from fish, along with polyphenols and antioxidants from colorful fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and olive oil. And since we're on the topic, another study which looked into the lipid profiles of over 700 individuals in the UK discovered that women with Alzheimer's had a significant deficiency in omega-3 fatty acids. Certainly makes you think. Staying on the topic of mechanisms of action, another key advantage of a proper diet, like the Mediterranean one, is a optimized metabolism. For example, the APOE4 gene naturally creates problems with lipid metabolism, essentially impairing one's brain from transporting and processing fats properly, thus impairing brain cell repair and function. But the real food Mediterranean-like diet provides the right type of fats, specifically the monounsaturated healthy fats, that actually help alleviate this metabolic dysfunction. Moral of the story being, give your body the tools to do its thing. Because when you do, the response can be pretty freaking amazing. With that, here are some practical tips to help your body help you through the way you eat. Starting with the very important statement that the prioritization of real, whole, organic, wild, grass-fed, pasture-raised foods cannot be emphasized enough. Remember, if it came from nature and it's in its natural form, it's hard to go wrong. And if you're wondering where these foods are typically located, it's at the perimeters of your local grocery establishments. So try and stay there. And when you get to selection, aiming your meals around fatty fish and grass-fed meats, eggs, nuts, seeds, an abundance of fruits, vegetables, beans, and legumes, healthy fats like single-source cold-pressed olive oil, and minimizing ultra-processed foods is a good framework to strive for. And if you happen to be one of those individuals who is battling the APOE4 variant or dealing with some other genetic predisposition, make an emphasis to double down on those omega-3 rich foods. Prioritize phytonutrient-loaded fruits and veggies. Consider strategic meal timing, aka an intermittent fasting protocol, to enhance your longevity gene expression, and make all of those other epigenetic modulating lifestyle interventions a daily priority. We're talking regular, intense badonkadonking, aka exercise, consistent, high-quality circadian aligned sleep, stress management, more nature, being social, avoiding toxins, and making it a goal to challenge your neurons consistently by living a life of continuous learning. And to be honest, even if you're not genetically predisposed, you should be doing this too, simply because it will sway your genetic expression ever in your favor. Think of this as your prescription for genetic empowerment, a permission slip to choose another path, one in which you believe your daily actions matter, where owning your health allows you to own your outcome. And most importantly, feeling effing awesome is your norm. No, it doesn't just happen. But that doesn't mean it can't and shouldn't. And the first step always is making that intentional choice to believe, and then carrying that belief out through your actions. So hopefully you're on my side of the fence on that. And if you are, there's really nothing left to do except get expressing.